The quickest way to lose your fantasy football league is to draft a bust, a player who vastly underperforms their draft position. So who are those players going to be and how do we avoid them? That's all the subject of this show, and it's coming up now. Hello, everyone. I'm Gary Kurtzman.
And I'm Eric Lee, and we are the Fantasy Football Consultants. And today, Gary, we're going to talk about busts because, as you just said, it's so important not to draft someone earlier and get stuck with someone who greatly underperforms. And when we say bust, we're not saying that they're going to have a horrible year. It's just based on where they currently are in the ADP, average draft position. We think that they're going to underperform. And let's get straight to that list. You know, in the very first round, let's say in a 10-team league, from 1 to 10, we don't see anyone in there that is that we think is going to greatly underperform.
People are making good selections in the first 10 picks.
Yeah, so let's put up on the board 11 through 20. And let's see if you can see who we saw as our first underperforming player. It's the guy at the back of the list. At number 20, LeSean McCoy. Look, there's about 4 things going against LeSean McCoy. I want to admit that he finished 7th of all running backs last year. But this year, things are going to be different. First of all, Buffalo's offensive line has lost 3 interior blockers. Second, the quarterbacks that they have, whether it's A.J. McCarron or they go to Josh Allen, a rookie, are probably in the bottom 2 or 3 starting quarterbacks in all of football.
Yeah.
And then, 3, his age. A running back, McCoy turned 30. That's getting older, especially when you consider bad offensive line and people stacking the box. And then finally, in the offseason, the Buffalo Bills signed Chris Ivory, and Chris Ivory may very well take LeSean McCoy's goal line carries because Ivory's bigger and stronger than McCoy.
Yeah, and you saw him. He did it with the Jets, and your point about being 30, statistically, running backs quite literally start falling off the table in their age 30 year. It's just something you got to watch out for.
So we go on to the third round from 21 to 30, and we have, count them, 3 overvalued players in this area. Gary, what's our first one?
Well, if you see from the list, it's right at the top, number 21, Christian McCaffrey. And, you know, I got a lot of people when I say that say,
what? Sell crazy someplace else. We're all stocked up here.
Hey, look, I get that. I get that he's talented. I get that there's a lot of hype about him and that I've heard about him as not a bust, but a potential breakout year in podcasts and in magazines. I don't see the logic. In fact, I don't see the logic at all, and here's why. Okay, Christian McCaffrey, all of 5'11", 205 pounds. He is not an every down back, and nobody pretends he is. He got 8 carries a game last year, and Ron Rivera says that workload is about right. That's why they brought in C.J. Anderson. So C.J. Anderson can carry the rock 20 times a game, right? So if you get 8 carries a game, well, what about passes? Because he's a good receiver. Well, yes, he is, and he caught. I guess he caught, 6 catches a game, last year. And even if he improves that, even if he gets 16 catches more and catches 7 a game, okay, that's 15 touches. And that's a ceiling, 15 touches per game. Even if he averages 5.5 yards a touch, he still isn't getting to 100 yards a game. And Lord knows as far as touchdowns, because that's paying the fantasy bills, folks, those touchdowns. Look, all the first and second down runs are going to C.J. Anderson. All the goal line work is going to go to C.J. Anderson. I don't see where people think that these touchdowns are going to come from. He got a very small handful of touchdowns last year. There is no reason to believe, with no role change in Carolina, that he's going to get more than that this year. Small handful of touchdowns, less than 100 yards a game. There's no way in heck that he should be among the top 10 running backs, and yet he's being drafted to the 21st position, and that's where that puts him. Folks, here's the deal. I know you can bet on talent all day long, but fantasy is a land of opportunity. He's not getting the opportunity in Carolina to justify the 21st pick. So Christian McCaffrey is likely to be a bust.
Yeah, there's 2 concerns I have. One is, even if C.J. Anderson doesn't get the rushing touchdown, the next most likely person is Cam Newton to steal it. And even on those receptions, watch out for Greg Olsen. Wilson, don't forget that he was injured almost the entire year. And how well does Christian McCaffrey do with Greg Olsen as another competitor for reception?
Oh, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So number 3 on the list, staying with the same ADP in the 3rd round, we got Mike Evans. So Mike Evans is the 7th wide receiver off the board. And, hey, for those of you who remember 2016, congratulations on a long memory. I know he got 170-plus targets. It's incredible, right? Well, he hasn't gotten that since then. In fact, he hasn't even touched that within 35 targets, for crying out loud. Here's a guy who gets 130 to 140 targets a year. And with that, he is, talk about poor yards per touch, talk about inefficient. He's not only out of the top 10, he's out of the top 20. He literally gets less yards per catch and less yards after contact than the top 20 receivers. So if his average targets, not counting 2016, which is an anomalous year, if his average targets are just outside the top 10, and his average efficiency for the last 3 years, other than 2016, is outside the top 20, then how do you get to the 7th best wide receiver? I just don't see it unless it's on touchdowns. That's what pays the fantasy bills. But folks, he's outside the top 10 in red zone targets, and he's outside the top 10 in red zone efficiency. So how's he getting to number 7, Eric? I just don't see it. I think Mike Evans has got bust written all over him.
Yeah, I agree. You know, if you look at his stats over the last couple of years, very few big games that he gives you. He cannot, for a number 1 receiver, he's incredibly poor at carrying your team. He hasn't had a 100-yard game in over 20 games. So,
which is incredible.
Yeah, so let's move on. In the same list, at number 28, we are listing as an overvalued player, Aaron Rodgers.
Inconceivable! I can't believe it. I just don't believe it.
Wait a minute, Eric. Didn't you just say in another video that your number 1 quarterback was Aaron Rodgers? I agree. Guilty as charged. But the problem is the depth at the quarterback position. Let's just be frank. You can get Russell Wilson 22 picks later at ADP 50. Cam Newton in the 60s. Even in the 11th round in a 10-team league. In other words, ADP over 100. Look at the quarterbacks that are available at that point. Matt Ryan, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, Andrew Luck, and Pat Mahomes. Bottom line, the opportunity cost is too high to pick Aaron Rodgers at pick overall number 28.
Absolutely. There's still great number 1 running backs and even number 1 wide receivers still on the board for NFL teams.
Yep.
Absolutely. Wait on quarterbacks. Who's the number 5 on our bust list? Well, now we're showing you picks 31 through 40, ADP 31 through 40, and sitting at number 33 is T.Y. Hilton. So, what did we get from T.Y. Hilton last year, Eric?
Well, not much.
Not much. In fact, I think that sound that you heard at the Indy Stadium was exactly. Now, thank you very much. That was the sound clip I was looking for, folks. Here's the deal. Look, he goes as Luck goes. There's just, Andrew Luck and T.Y. Hilton are married to the hip, for better or for worse. T.Y. Hilton is a great talent. There's no question about it. So is Andrew Luck. So now you're saying, well, wait a minute, Gary. Andrew Luck is now playing football again. In fact, he's playing in the first preseason game. He's definitely going to be ready for week 1. Here's the problem. T.Y. Hilton, without Andrew Luck, was so bad that he couldn't even break 1,000 yards in a very small handful of touchdowns. Folks, that's like wide receiver 30 material. Okay, that's like ADP in the 60s. Okay, how much better does he need Luck to be to justify being the ADP, the draft pick of 33, making him, by the way, in the just barely in the top 10 in wide receivers? He needs Andrew Luck to be at or just about as good as he was prior to the injury. And folks, I got to tell you, there's no reason in the world to expect that. I mean, Andrew Luck, I wish him well. He's the nicest guy in the world, and God-given talent. But he went 18 months without throwing the football for a shoulder condition that should have had him rest for 6 months. He went almost 18 months of rest because of all those complications. Eric, you can't be out of football for 2 years and have all those complications and multiple surgeries and expect to be as good out of the gate or even in the full season as good as you were before. We've seen it happen time and time again with quarterbacks with this rotator cuff injury. It just doesn't happen. And the reality is this: I wish the guy well, but if he even loses 3 fantasy points per game, that's all we're talking about. 3 fantasy points per game, he falls from the 4th best quarterback all the way down to the 14th best quarterback. And folks, T.Y. Hilton with the 14th best quarterback looks a lot closer to T.Y. Hilton last year than he would be at his ADP position of 33 that is forecasted for this year. I'm sorry, but it's got bust written all over it.
Yeah, I know some of you are like, that's not fair to T.Y. Hilton. You're talking about Andrew Luck, but they don't have anyone else other than Andrew Luck. So you're tied, as goes Andrew Luck. That's how T.Y. Hilton's going to go. Let's put up 51 through 60, and our next overvalued player is Tom Brady. That's almost sacrilegious in my family because my nephew Hayden loves Tom Brady. I think he's still a very good quarterback, but here's the problem. All the things I said about Aaron Rodgers as well about the depth of quarterback, but in addition to that, he has 3 things working heavily against him. First off, he's 41 years old.
If I were the man I was 5 years ago, I'd take a flamethrower to this place.
I love Al Pacino.
That's right. Brady would put a flamethrower 5 years ago, but he's not the player he was 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. You go, hey, wait a minute, Eric, what are you talking about? Did you see the Super Bowl, how great he played? Yes. It's my complaint with Brady's decline fantasy-wise is not with his arm, it's with his legs. In 16 games last year, he amassed a grand total of 28 yards rushing.
God, I thought that was absolutely dreadful.
Worse than that, remember he used to call his number on the 1 yard line and score touchdowns?
Yeah.
He had his 2nd consecutive year where he did not get a single rushing touchdown. So throw in the fact that he lost protection by his left tackle Nate Solder leaving. He lost weapons to throw to in Brandon Cooks and Danny Amendola, as well as Julian Edelman being out for the first 4 games. I think I have to pass on Tom Brady this year, given that he's going at 51 overall.
Yeah, especially with the quarterback depth. It's still a big opportunity cost.
Yeah. So let's move on to our 7th overall overvalued player. It's on the same list. Take a look at that. It's actually number 56, Evan Engram. So look, I'm going to be brief here. Evan Engram had 115 targets last year. Why? For 2 reasons. 1, the Giants were awful and were throwing the ball almost the entire game. And 2, there was no other targets for the Giants to throw to because everyone else was injured.
Right.
This year's going to be different. Odell Beckham is back healthy. Sterling Shepard is back healthy. And now they have Saquon Barkley, who not only will participate in the passing game, he will be running the ball a lot. So I think the focus of pass versus run for the Giants will go a lot more to running, especially since I think they'll be an improved team. Temper expectations and simply pass at 56 for Evan Engram. You can wait and get a tight end like a Trey Burton much later.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. He's being valued right now based on his stats from last year. No way he gets anywhere near the target, so anywhere near the stats. Finally, number 8, we got Jarvis Landry. You can see from the list, he's ADP 57. Jarvis Landry got 161 targets last year for Miami. You could argue about whether he should, but the fact of the matter is he did. And he still finished outside the top 20 in wide receivers. Wow. Folks, he's now in Cleveland. You got Corey Coleman, you got Josh Gordon. Frankly, Jarvis Landry is clearly the 3rd most talented wide receiver just on that team, and there are 300 targets for the year to be had in Cleveland. Even if they split it 100, 100, 100, okay, that's 100 targets instead of 161, and if he was outside the top 20 with 161, he's way outside the top 40 with just 100. There's no reason in the world why his ADP should be 57. I get the big contract, although I don't understand it, but there's no way he fulfills it. Folks, this is truly, based on opportunity, got bust written all over it.
Yeah, and don't look for Tyrod Taylor to be throwing a ball for 300 yards all of a sudden. He's never done it before anywhere near that in his career. I doubt you'll see it this year on Cleveland.
Absolutely. So now we've got the rankings for all of these players and all the rest of the NFL players updated regularly on fantasyfootballconsultants.net. So please visit that site and take a look at the rankings and the analysis.
Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Until we see our next video, we will see you then.
We'll see you then.